Detective Hannah Keene froze as the DNA report printed across her screen. 5 decades of unanswered questions, faded files, and dead witnesses, and now a single genetic link that shattered 50 years of silence. The killer wasn't an outsider. He'd lived just 3 doors down. It was October 15th, 1972, in the quiet town of Newark, Ohio, when 16-year-old Emily Carter vanished on her walk home from a high school football game. She never made it back. Emily was bright, outgoing, and loved by everyone. A cheerleader, straight-A student, and volunteer at the local church youth program. The kind of girl everyone thought would grow up to leave town and make something big of herself. But her name would soon be known for something darker, a case that would haunt Ohio for half a century. The night started normally. The Newark Panthers had just lost 14-7, and students poured out of the stadium under yellow floodlights. Emily said goodbye to friends, telling them she'd walk home. Her house was only 12 blocks away, a short, safe path she'd taken dozens of times. But at 9:47 p.m., she disappeared. By midnight, her parents called the police. Officers scoured the route she usually took, Main Street to Maple Avenue, then the shortcut through the wooded lot behind the Miller hardware store. The next morning, a volunteer found one of her white sneakers in the brush, its laces torn. 3 days later, a hunter discovered Emily's body 2 miles away, near a drainage ditch off State Route 13. She'd been assaulted and strangled. The crime shook the small Ohio town to its core. Detective Frank Daly, the lead investigator at the time, described it as the one that changed everything. He'd seen murders before. Bar fights gone wrong, domestic disputes, but nothing like this. Nothing so senseless. The town went into lockdown. Parents stopped letting their kids walk alone. Curfews were imposed unofficially. Neighbors watched from windows, and rumors spread faster than the autumn wind. The first suspect was Rick Morgan, a 19-year-old who dated Emily briefly the previous year. He was questioned for hours, but released. No evidence, no confession, and no DNA testing in 1972 to prove anything. Next was a traveling carnival worker spotted near the fairgrounds that week, but that lead fizzled too. Then police questioned a local handyman, George Whitaker, known for odd behavior. He failed a polygraph but had an alibi. He'd been at a bar all night, confirmed by multiple witnesses. Weeks passed, then months. The case went cold before Christmas. Entire life. Pretending to be just another neighbor. When the Ohio Cold Case Unit was formed in 2022, Detective Hannah Keene was assigned to re-examine unsolved homicides using modern forensic genealogy. Her first pull from the archive was the Carter case, mostly because she grew up just 20 miles from Newark. "I remembered hearing about her when I was a kid," she said. "It always bothered me that nobody ever answered for it." The evidence was old, brittle, and cataloged in fading ink. But the fingernail sample, shockingly, was intact. Keene sent it to the state lab for advanced DNA extraction. 6 weeks later, she got the call. The lab had found a partial male DNA profile. It was enough to enter into CODIS, the national database. But there was no match, at least not yet. That's when Keene decided to use genetic genealogy, the same technique that caught the Golden State Killer. She uploaded the profile to a public genealogy site used for cold case research. Within days, there was a hit, a distant relative connected to an old Ohio family tree. The name that surfaced sent shivers down her spine: Whitaker. It matched the same handyman who'd been questioned in 1972, George Whitaker, the man who'd passed a polygraph, built houses for half the town, and died in 2010 of natural causes. But the DNA wasn't his. It was a close familial match, suggesting the killer might have been someone related to him. Keene ordered a genealogical investigation to map the Whitaker lineage. Within a week, One name rose to the top: Robert Whitaker, George's younger brother. Robert had been only 21 in 1972. He'd lived 3 blocks from Emily's route home. He was never questioned because he'd left town for factory work the week after her death, disappearing from Newark and resurfacing in Cleveland months later. Keene tracked down Robert's records. He'd worked as a machinist, married twice, and died in 1996. His children still lived in Ohio. So she made the call, a careful, quiet visit to the Whitaker family home in Zanesville. She explained who she was, what case she was working on, and why she needed permission to test Robert's DNA through a retained medical sample. His daughter, visibly shaken, agreed. Weeks later, the results confirmed what no one wanted to believe. The DNA under Emily Carter's fingernails belonged to Robert Whitaker. For the first time in 51 years, detectives knew who killed her. Detective Keene called her captain immediately, then reached out to the only surviving member of the Carter family, Emily's younger brother, Mark, now in his 60s. She drove to his home, personally, to tell him the news. When she said the words, "We found him," Mark broke down. "My parents died not knowing," he said, "but maybe now they can rest." The official press conference came a week later, on February 6, 2024. Cameras flashed, reporters filled the small GBI auditorium, and Keene stood behind the podium holding the faded case photo. Emily in her cheer uniform, smiling at the camera. "This case reminds us that time does not destroy truth," she said. "It only waits for science to catch up." The crowd was silent. Even seasoned reporters were visibly moved. In Newark, people who had grown up hearing the name Emily Carter gathered at the old stadium, lighting candles in her memory. For the first time in 50 years, they had an ending, not the one they wanted, but one that finally made sense. Robert Whitaker had died without ever facing justice, but his name was finally public, his secret exposed. The story that haunted Ohio for generations had finally come full circle. And as Detective Keene said in her final statement, "Justice doesn't die when the killer does. It dies only when we stop looking." Detective Hannah Keene sat in her car outside the Ohio Bureau of Investigation that night, staring at the lights flickering through the glass. The case that had haunted a town for 51 years was finally closed, but her mind wouldn't rest. For months, she had lived inside the world of 1972, reading old witness reports, walking the same streets, standing in the same shadows where Emily Carter had taken her last breath. And though she had solved the case, a single question remained. Why did Robert Whitaker do it? There was no chance of an interrogation. Whitaker had been dead since 1996, but Keene was determined to reconstruct his motives. She began digging into his past, interviewing anyone who remembered him. What she found was a portrait of a man who had hidden in plain sight, his darkness masked by an ordinary life. Robert Whitaker was born in 1951, the youngest of 3 boys. His father was an alcoholic who ran a small construction business, and his mother died when he was 16. Neighbors remembered him as quiet, a little strange, but polite. He kept to himself, spent time fixing cars, and worked odd jobs around town. In 1972, he was living just 2 blocks from Emily's route home, renting a small basement apartment from an elderly widow who thought of him as a good boy who never caused trouble. But there were whispers even then. One local girl, now in her 70s, told investigators that Robert used to linger outside the high school fence, watching cheer practice. Another recalled him showing up at the diner where students hung out after games. He'd sit there for hours, she said, didn't talk much, just watched. Detective Keene pieced together a timeline. On the night of October 15, 1972, Whitaker had been seen near the football stadium by 2 witnesses, a gas station clerk and a friend of Emily's. Both described a man in a brown jacket standing near the corner when the crowd dispersed. Police never followed up at the time. There were hundreds of people there, and no reason to suspect him. After the murder, Robert left town suddenly, telling friends he'd gotten a job offer at a machine shop in Cleveland. He never returned to Newark. He worked there for years, married a woman named Susan, and had 2 children. To everyone who knew him, he was quiet, kind, maybe a bit distant, but nothing about him screamed killer. He attended church, helped coach Little League, even volunteered for community repairs. He lived a full life, while Emily Carter's family lived with a hole that never closed. It wasn't until Keene reviewed his death certificate that she saw the irony. The man who had taken a life had died of a heart attack, sudden, peaceful, and unpunished. Justice, it seemed, had waited for technology to catch him. But Keene wasn't done. She reopened every witness statement, every lab note, searching for what everyone had missed. One report from 1972 mentioned something curious: a piece of rope, identical to what was used to tie Emily's wrists, found in a construction site dumpster less than a mile from Whitaker's apartment. At the time, it wasn't unusual rope, and it was dismissed. But Keene traced it back to the same brand of rope Whitaker's father used at his construction business. It wasn't coincidence, it was connection. She also uncovered a set of missing person reports from nearby counties between 1970 and 1973. Young women, same age range, vanishing under similar circumstances. None had ever been linked to Whitaker, but the pattern was hauntingly similar. Victims last seen walking home. No robbery, no witnesses, always near wooded back roads. Keene suspected Emily wasn't his first, but his last, one mistake away from being caught. There would be no trial, no cross-examination, no confession. But what came next was something equally powerful: the town's reckoning with its own past. Newark had changed in 50 years. New homes, new schools, new faces, but the ghost of Emily Carter was still there. When news of the DNA breakthrough broke, local stations replayed grainy black and white photos of the 1972 investigation. Detectives with cigarettes hanging from their mouths, the muddy crime scene, the crowd of stunned onlookers. For many residents, it was like reopening a wound that had never healed. Within days, the old stadium bleachers were covered with candles, flowers, and handwritten letters. "You were never forgotten," one read. "We finally know," said another. The town's mayor announced a memorial service to honor Emily and thank the investigators who refused to give up. At that service, standing before a crowd of hundreds, Detective Keene shared what she'd learned. She described the process, how DNA extracted from a fingernail half a century old could identify a killer dead for decades. "This is what modern forensics can do," she said. "It gives voices back to those who were silenced." Her words drew a standing ovation. Among the attendees was a frail man sitting in the front row, Frank Daly, the retired detective who'd led the original investigation. Now 84, he wiped away tears as he spoke to reporters afterward. "We had nothing back then," he said. "No DNA, no computers, no databases, just gut instinct and dead ends. I always knew we were missing something. I just never thought I'd live to see it found." The Carter family, though smaller now, stood together. Mark Carter, his wife, and their grown children. When asked how it felt to finally know, Mark said, "It's like taking a deep breath after holding it for 50 years. The case went viral nationwide. Major outlets ran headlines like "Ohio cold case cracked after 51 years," and "DNA from 1972 fingernail leads to killer." True crime podcasts dissected every detail. The state attorney general called it a landmark moment for forensic genealogy. Behind the media buzz, Keene's work inspired something bigger. Ohio's legislature passed a bill allocating new funding for cold case DNA testing. The Carter Act, as it came to be known, guaranteed every unsolved homicide with biological evidence would be reviewed using modern technology. Emily Carter's story will not be another statistic, the governor said during the signing. Her name now stands for progress. For Keene, the case had become personal. She visited the wooded area near State Route 13 one last time before closing the file. The autumn air felt heavy, still carrying traces of 1972. Crickets, rustling leaves, the hum of distant traffic. She stood at the spot where Emily's body was found and placed a small bouquet of lilies on the ground. "We found him," she whispered. "It took 51 years, but we found him." She stayed there for a long time, watching the sunset fade behind the trees. For a detective, there's no such thing as closure, only answers. And this case had given one simple, unchanging truth. Evil can wait a lifetime, but so can justice. That night, back at the office, Keene received an email from an analyst at the crime lab. It was about another case. Similar age, similar DNA degradation. "Thought you might want to see this," the message read. She opened the attachment. A 1974 case file. Female victim. No suspect. The note at the bottom read, "Evidence intact. Testing recommended." Keene smiled faintly. "On to the next one," she said, turning off the light. In the end, the story of Emily Carter wasn't just about one girl or one killer. It was about what time does and doesn't erase. 51 years of silence didn't stop the truth from speaking. It only made its voice louder when it finally arrived. And for the town of Newark, Ohio, that voice echoed through every streetlight, every memory, every quiet autumn night where, for the first time in half a century, people could finally walk home without fear. The months following the DNA revelation felt surreal for the people of Newark. For half a century, Emily Carter's story had been a whispered legend, something that parents mentioned to warn their children about walking home alone. Now, the whispers had become headlines, and the myth had turned into fact. The town's oldest mystery had been solved, but the emotions it unearthed were raw and complicated. Detective Hannah Keene found herself at the center of the media storm. Every news outlet wanted an interview. Every network wanted to feature the story of the 51-year-old murder that modern science had cracked wide open. But Keene wasn't interested in the fame. "It's never about the detective," she told one interviewer. "It's about the victim and the truth that finally found her." Still, the weight of the case stayed with her. She would wake in the middle of the night, thinking about Emily's last walk, the sound of footsteps on the pavement, the flash of headlights, the moment everything went silent. Solving it didn't erase the horror. It only gave it shape. In early spring 2024, the Newark Police Department organized a memorial ceremony at the newly dedicated Emily Carter Park, located on the very path she used to take home from football games. The park featured a small fountain, a memorial stone engraved with her name, and the words, "Her story ended too soon. Her truth never did." Hundreds attended the dedication. Old classmates, teachers, detectives, and residents who had long moved away came back to witness history being rewritten. As the crowd gathered, church bells rang through the crisp air, a haunting reminder of time's passage. Mark Carter, Emily's brother, was the first to speak. He stood at the podium, voice trembling. "When I was a kid, I used to wait for her to come home from those games," he said. "She'd always tap twice on the door when she came in, our secret code. The night she didn't, I knew something was wrong." It took 51 years for that door to finally close. He paused, looking at the fountain's reflection. "But now she's home." The audience stood in silence as white doves were released. One for each decade Emily's case remained unsolved, plus one for the years she never lived to see. After the ceremony, Keene approached Mark quietly. "Your sister gave more than she ever knew," she said. "Because of her case, others will be solved too." He nodded. "That's the best kind of justice," he replied. In the following months, Keene and her team expanded the Carter Initiative. reviewing dozens of old Ohio files that had once been considered unsolvable. Several cases were reopened, and by late 2024, at least 3 more cold cases saw breakthroughs because of the same DNA genealogy techniques that solved Emily's. The story became a teaching case in national law enforcement conferences. Experts analyzed how the preservation of evidence, something as small as a fingernail clipping, could alter history. But the Carter case also exposed a deeper truth about small-town America in the 1970s. How crimes could slip through cracks, not because of negligence, but because of limited tools. Back then, police relied on confessions, fingerprints, and eyewitnesses' accounts. DNA was science fiction. The thought that one microscopic cell could identify a murderer was unimaginable. Detective Frank Daly, the original investigator, passed away just 3 months after the memorial. He was buried with a folded newspaper article about the case, the headline visible through the glass of the frame. Ohio 1972 cold case solved. DNA breakthrough ends mystery. At his funeral, Keene delivered a eulogy. He carried this case longer than anyone, she said. And even though it was solved after his time, his work made it possible. Some lights burn long after we think they've gone out. Meanwhile, whispers about Robert Whitaker continued. People who'd known him struggled to reconcile the neighbor who helped fix flat tires and coached baseball with the man who'd taken a teenager's life. Old photos surfaced. Whitaker standing at community picnics, smiling beside children, even volunteering at church fundraisers. He'd hidden in plain sight, his darkness disguised as decency. Investigators later found other suspicious clues in his past. A woman in Cleveland came forward, saying she'd once worked with him in the late 70s and remembered him being uncomfortably interested in young girls. Another claimed that he often took long drives at night, saying he liked quiet roads. None of it proved additional crimes, but it painted a chilling portrait of a man who might have hurt more people than anyone would ever know. Keene summarized it best in a documentary interview. Whitaker's life was a mask. He built it piece by piece, the job, the family, the reputation. But you can't outrun what you are. The truth doesn't rot, and DNA doesn't lie. By autumn, the story had reached classrooms across Ohio. Teachers used it as a lesson in perseverance and science. True crime enthusiasts online called it one of the most haunting small-town cases ever solved. Yet despite the attention, Keene remained grounded. When a reporter asked if she felt the case was finally over, she smiled faintly and said, "For me, yes. For the Carter family, it never really ends. But at least now, their questions have answers." In December, she visited Emily's grave one last time before moving to a new assignment. Snow blanketed the headstones, and the town lay silent. She brushed off the snow and placed a single red rose beside the stone. "You waited long enough," she whispered. A few feet away stood a small plaque donated by local residents. It read, "Justice delayed is not justice denied." Keene lingered there for several minutes, feeling the cold wind sweep across the cemetery. The case had changed her, reminded her that every name in a file, every black and white photo, was a life once filled with laughter, routine, and plans that never ... came to be. Driving back to Columbus, she glanced at the box of case files in her passenger seat. New names, new mysteries, new families waiting for their truth. She smiled faintly and muttered, "Let's find them too." That same evening, the lights in Newark's town square glowed brighter than ever. The town had begun decorating for Christmas, and among the wreaths and ribbons, one light shone a little longer, a single candle burning beneath Emily Carter's memorial photo. Someone had left a note beneath it that simply read, "She matters, still." And that's what the Carter case became. Not a tragedy frozen in time, but a symbol of persistence. proof that even when years fade and memories blur, truth waits patiently beneath the surface, ready for the right person to uncover it. For Ohio, it was more than a solved mystery. It was a promise kept, a promise that no matter how long it takes, justice has no expiration date. When the headlines faded and the cameras left, one simple fact remained. The DNA that ended a 51-year mystery didn't just solve a crime. It resurrected a voice that time had tried to silence. And now, the town that once lived in fear finally rests in peace, because Emily Carter's story is no longer a question. It's an answer.